Who's going to ask the first question?
Can I just check this is actually working, yeah?
Mr. Pilgrim, Mr. Roger Pilgrim.
Right, gentlemen, I thought I'd give you a nice, easy question to start off with. What's the most surprising thing that's ever happened to you on a tennis court?
And what was her name?
I'm going to pass this one over to Wayne.
Thanks, Wayne.
No, I'll answer that. I was I was giving a lesson at the club in New York, and I turn around and there's a stark naked man in the dead on, and that took me by surprise. Yeah.
You said you wouldn't tell that story.
There we go.
My most surprising moment on a real tennis court is probably giving a lesson, and the young lady that I was giving a lesson to couldn't hit the ball. She wasn't nude. She did have clothes on, and I tried to get her to bounce the ball on the end of the racket, and she took a swing and hit me straight in the face. So, Chris? With the racket. With the racket.
I suppose I had a similar experience that I was giving someone a lesson in Oxford about 100 years ago and teaching them how to serve, as I thought, starting off. I said, well, you hold the ball out there, toss it up, and then hit it. And the person forgot to take their own hand away, so... That was quite messy. And they didn't come back.
Right, moving on. Another question.
You keep it.
Leslie, yes.
Frank.
Leslie. Leslie. Well, this is just how we used to speak to each other.
What was it like being a real tennis pro as regards to the members in the 1960s?
Can you remember that?
Have you any
Can I remember that far back? Yes. It was certainly very different, but I must say it was excellent. I loved it. Some of the older people in the game were tremendous. They were great people, great experience to be with them, taught me a lot. Yes, and then obviously life changed as new members came into the game. It became more relaxed. But I will never forget the old times, Leslie, because they were absolutely beautiful. So. Wait, I'm sorry.
Next question.
John.
Could each of you say which is the most favourite court for you to play on and why?
Well, that's easy for me. It's New York. I think it's the best court in the world, and in the best setting in the world. Either court, and I've had such, there's also the memories of all the matches we've played there. But I'm sure everybody here has different things to say. How about we hand it to the world champ?
Without question, my favourite court is Newport. You can serve a perfect railroad, and when you have a backhand volley like mine, that augurs well.
Oh, thank you. Favourite court is Lord's. Great support every time I went. Terrific people, and one of the finest professionals in the game. So, yeah, that was my favourite court. Always a delight to go to it. Chris?
I take it, Frank, you were referring to David Cull then,
I was.
not Henry Johns. Well, if I have to answer that question, I'd say my favourite court is always the one I played the last 3 times on, because you feel more comfortable where you've just played. And so right now it's Radley. Come and try it.
Another question for Frank, and it's lovely to see you looking so young here, Frank, despite having to sit next to Tommy Pugh at dinner. I mean, somebody's got to do it. Anyway, you mentioned David Cull, God bless him, and actually, sorry, Chris, I'll ask you about members in the 50s in a moment, but you mentioned David Cull. It would be very nice if you could share with us. Obviously, we miss him all particularly all those who played at Lord's, but everybody in the game misses David. If you could share with us some of your memories of playing doubles with him, some of the appalling things you got up to together, and just generally give us a sort of lowdown on David, which we'd all love to hear. Thank you.
The very first time I met David, I was playing, it was a challenge match between the Lord's professional and the Manchester professional. I'd never met him before. I arrived at Lord's rather early. The cleaners let me in, and I slept on the huge sofa in the dead-on, and till eventually somebody brought Henry Johns and David Cull, and that was my first meeting of David Cull. That became a great friendship. He was a character that, how can I describe it? He was so gentle, and yet he had such a great sense of humour. This is fairly difficult because we got up to so many strange things in life, and I'm certainly not going to repeat those because this, I believe, is on the internet.
What about the time you were street?
I can't. When quite a few years ago we had a party at Davies. We had many parties at Davids, and he lived opposite the local park with the paddling pool. And we climbed over the fence, including my wife, and we all decided to streak in the paddling pool. And the following morning, there was the park keeper there, and he was going on about somebody's lost this shoe, and I was walking for the morning paper with no shoe and no sock. But he was fantastic, and just, I'm sure so many people have met him, so many people know him, and so many people know him so well, and everybody misses him so much. I just love him to have been here. So.
Oh, we're on. I'd like to ask you four, sorry. I must have had too much to drink already. 4 great players. No, I've got to concentrate. And these 4 great players, I'd like to ask you, which opponent, the 4 of you, in 1, 2, 3, 4, you've all got to answer, please, was the best you ever played against?
Good question, Tom. Unusual for you. Well, with respect to the great players sitting right next to me, I had incredible matches with all of them. In fact, over the years, although so long ago now I don't remember. Thank you. But to be honest, I mean, there was only one person that's ever truly beaten me when I considered myself to be in good form, and that was Tim Chisholm. And so for me to come back and beat up on him, probably my best tennis, and I would put him as my best opponent.
I think it's a good way to put it. Who beat me when I was playing my best? hands down, would be Lockie Tukar here at Queen's. I can't think of anybody I've seen who could beat Lockie when you had when you could serve a giraffe and boomerang here. I can't imagine him being beaten. And I'd just beaten him, I think, 7-1 at New York, and he just annihilated me. Chris will probably tell me the score. But in 1989, I think it was annihilation, and I've never felt so inept against anybody as playing against him when he's playing well.
I never played against Rob or Wayne when I was young enough to really test them. Chris I did, and he would certainly go down as one of the toughest opponents I ever played. But just to edge that one, I think probably Howard Angus was a lovely person to play against and a very, very tough person to play against. For me, it's Howard.
When I was a junior, which is quite a long time ago now, the three great players in this country were Frank Willis, Nord Cripps and Howard. And those three dominated the scene for, it seemed like about 15 years. And I enjoyed playing against all of them, but I did feel that the gentleman sitting next to me was the toughest. He had the best technique, and I remember once when Peter Dawes was teaching me this game, thank you, Peter, he said to me, here's what it's like when you play Howard. You serve one down, and he hits the ball back, and you hit a great shot, and he gets it back, and you hit an even better shot, and he gets it back on the penthouse, and you go for a screamer, and you make a mistake, and that's how you lose. That's how you lose to Howard. Against Frank, you hit the ball to him, and he hits a good shot, and you get it back, and then he kills it. So Frank has it for my money.
Gentlemen, have any of you played the great Etchebuster, or how do you think his style of game would work against the modern professionals?
Seems I've got the mic and I'm going to answer this one first. I have never played against Pierre, and I don't think any of the lads have played against Pierre. I knew him very well, exceptionally well. I spent many hours with him. A difficult question, because I always believe that putting one old champion against a modern champion is very difficult to do. I think Pierre was a great player. Would he survive? Would he be as good against somebody like Rob? Maybe not. I think Rob is a little bit special, and I think Pierre would have had a lot of problems with him. That's my view.
One thing you've got to remember is he played with vastly different tennis balls as well. His ball weighed, I think, about half an ounce more than ours, what we're playing with now. And so I think it was 1955, they switched across to the same tennis balls they played over here, and it's been the same way since. And so that really has to be taken into account, because you couldn't force that ball so much. And I think it's, who's the best player of all? If you're talking tennis, ordinary tennis, I would think that in answer to the question, who's the best player of all time, Rod Laver would be right up there. But would Rod Laver beat Federer? I'd have to say no, he wouldn't. And I do think it's a little it's too difficult to answer that question, and I'll leave it at that.
There's no doubt Pierre's record speaks for itself. I think a lot of what he did isn't as much out of the game as people think. If you look at the statistics from him playing Covey, there's a huge amount of winning openings, in particular on the dead-on. And I think you find as his opponents got weaker and weaker, he played more and more on the floor. And, I think we all know teaching and playing whoever we play, that you can beat most people with a nice game on the floor. But Wayne's right in that he had very different equipment, and so therefore the game was quite different. And I don't think he, it's chalk and cheese.
Chris?
I've got to answer that one too. I would say Wayne is right, of course, about the balls, but a big change occurred in the late 70s when we moved across to synthetic stringing. If you look at all the old photos of players before that time, they're all standing at chase better than a yard. Now, if you want to play seriously, you have to stand at 2 and 3 or 3 or something like that to be able to pick up the forces. It is a very different game with this equipment. As those of you who will pick up Catherine's book about the World Championships will find out, Pierre was an extraordinary talent. He was uniquely a champion at all 3 Basque sports before he even started real tennis, and he was outstanding. He had something special. Having said all that, I do believe that Rob would have beaten him if they're both playing their best, both with the same equipment.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Jeans. This is a question for Rob. He will remember a couple of years ago now, he very kindly brought these nice young chaps from Australia to play against us at Melbourne. They were super guys. I remember 2 guys we had 2 problems with them. We couldn't get out of bed in the morning. And when they did get out of bed in the morning, they demolished the loaf and the cornflakes. But they were great news. Well, when are you going to bring them back to us? We'd love to see them again.
Excellent question. If I could remember the competition they're playing in, what's the name of that? Lim Trophy. The Lim Trophy, I think, is due to be played in Melbourne or Hobart, or has just been played. I think the answer to your question is in 2 years' time, and I'll make sure they look you up.
Yes, please. I enjoyed that.
Stock up. Josh?
Yes, there is one internet question here from Jamie Bebb, who asks, what really happened, Frank? What really happened, Frank? Should we just leave it at that? Or should we go?
He asked for it.
From Jamie Bebb.
World Challenge, first leg in New York. Lots of rumours. Lots of rumours.
Is this the Central Park thing?
He's going on about naked running, and you're going... Oh, sorry. Nothing. Nothing that can be spoken about. It was an exceptionally good evening. And it was a very hot summer's evening. Now, you've got an imagination. Chris, please. Please.
I wasn't there.
Thanks, Jamie.
One from me. How has the change, in your view, how has the game changed since you started playing it?
I do think it's changed. I think it's changed a lot. I think the players are fitter. I think they are actually... I'm not going to say they're more talented, because there was a lot of very talented players in my time. But I do think they train harder. They play against a lot of good players, which is the most important thing. So, yeah, I think it's changed. I think the pace has changed, which it has to, because as you play better people, you play it quicker, you play it better. So, yeah, it has changed in that sense. It's quicker. It's more forceful. So, but never forget that the 3 lads at my side can all play tennis. They have all got an excellent tennis stroke. They may be able to volley, they may be able to hit it very hard, but at the end of the day, they can all play tennis.
Wayne, do you have any comment on how the game has changed since you started playing it? Oh, can we stop you?
Well, I I'm in a bad situation to actually say that because I haven't seen many good players play in the last 5, 6, 7 years. All I know is that I used to follow what Tom Pettit said. And remember, I think the game goes in cycles. I mean, all Tom Pettit was reputed to do was when he said, when I see a ball, I hit it, and I hit it as hard as I can. I mean, that's the way I started playing, and I think that's what we should be doing. If you're going to be a really good player, I think it's best to start to learn to hit the ball as hard as you can, as soon as you can, and worry about playing what Frank would call tennis a long time after that. I can remember the first time I played Frank was at Leamington Spa. Do you remember that match, Frank? Probably not. No, you won't.
Have another drink.
Yeah, but, no. So Frank, we're playing, and he'd never seen me before, and I'd heard all about him, and I just hit as hard as I could every single time. And after a while, Frank came up to the net and motioned me up, and I'm thinking, what's going on? And he looks at me and says, "You've got to cut the ball." and I'm like, well, why? and nothing has occurred since really to change my opinion of that.
It's very true. I mean, real tennis at the end of the day is a game of targets, and it is 100% about getting your statistics as high as you can. Once you can hit the grill and the dead on and the winning gallery all day long, why would you bother with the floor?
I know this is Chris's turn. I've just had a very sad feeling.
Yeah, I have to say I'm pretty uncomfortable that the gentleman, am I right? I think as I think someone alluded to earlier, you have to be able to cut the ball as well. If you just hit the ball, I think you can get a long way. I think Gene Scott tried that in the 70s, but I think ultimately, if you've got a proper cut stroke, you can apply pressure in ways. I mean, one of the great things about our game, of course, is there are so many different ways to skin the cat. And if you're up against a player who only goes for targets, there's quite a lot you can do to make it difficult to hit targets. So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. And I think, to be fair, Rob plays a game which is much more rounded than that himself. I haven't included Wayne in that remark.
Josh, can I build on that question? It's an evening about the development of the game and youth in particular. You talked about what's changed. I'd like to ask the guys if there was one thing you could change prospectively about the game, what is it you would like to see changed?
This is for you, Grandad.
Grief. I do not think there's anything in the game of real tennis at this moment in time that I would like to see changed.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I mean, people may have different ideas how to play it, and I've just heard some tonight. But somebody will eventually come along who has an amazingly strong game on the floor and wins. I mean, at the end of Rob actually has a very strong game on the floor. So I don't fully agree with what Rob said. In fact, I'm quite willing to have an argument. So I do not want to see things changed on a real tennis court, in my view, because I think players change things, and good luck to them.
Well, oddly enough, I think there's several things that should be changed. But they'd be more like the rules. For instance, I've always thought that the boomerang should be banned. I'd like to see it banned. I also would like to see any ball that lands before the yellow line on the roof be called a fault. And I think, in other words, you couldn't serve a railroad along the track quite so well. the little things like that, I think, would improve the game. And to think that our game can't be changed for the better is naive, I think. I mean, it's always changed, hasn't it? I mean, you used to be able to serve from the net. I mean, we've changed that. When I started playing the game, you could do pass. You could do all these. You could do the pass. They changed that. I mean, I can't believe we can't alter the game slightly to make it even better. I mean, there's a myriad of things I think we should change, and if we stop thinking that we can't change it, well, then it's going to go backwards, I think.
I think I would see 5,000 more courts in this country alone. With the greatest respect to all of you here, I'd bring the average age down by about 40. And I would increase the numbers by a few million. Moving on.
I'm just with Rob on that. We need more young players. We need more people in school. More youth.
Given that Frank said that it goes in silence, and given that this is a dinner sponsored or for the benefit of the Dedanists and the junior game and the academy, and given that all of you are probably quite greedy as far as maintaining your championship, what can we do to bring on new champions?
I have the microphone. I've just recently read a wonderful book by Matthew Syed called Bounce. And for those of you who haven't read it, do. It's wonderful. And essentially, it states that it doesn't matter how talented you think you are or aren't. The key ingredient is to do 10,000 hours. If you do 10,000 hours of anything, and Richard East agrees, so it must be true. Now, can you keep him quiet, please, Robert? Just keep him quiet. And it can be a violin, it can be chess, but primarily it could also be real tennis. Just get people to play more. And as Rob says, that means more courts and starting younger.
I think also, without doubt, more courts. That's the important thing. And enthusiasm from the people at the top to keep people coming into their own individual courts that will eventually encourage tennis throughout the country.
When I first started playing, there was plenty of time to practice. And Colin Lumley and I started off practicing in Melbourne 6 o'clock in the morning. 6:30, yeah. But we could get hours. You could play 2 or 3 hours a day. You can't do that now. But it's fairly hard. But supposing I was a club in England and I wanted to get the world champion. Well, surely I'd be employing the best possible talent I could find. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, this guy will be a great club professional. I wouldn't even enter into the equation. How talented is he? And train him to be world champion. You want the world champion? That's what you've got to do. Now, what club in England is prepared to do that? Hands up. Well, you've got to say, right, we're going to get the best player we can and pay him well, and he'll be world champion. And we'll give him hours to do that. Well, I don't see that happening. But overall, obviously, with more courts, you're going to get more players, and more players will get better talent. And it's true, you do have to just put in hours and hours, but you also have to have a mentor. They've done lots of studies on what is genius, and they've all concluded that, number one, you've got to be prepared to practice and practice or study or whatever it is. You've got to put in hours and hours. But number two, without a mentor to teach you and to who you look up to, you're up the creek without a paddle a little bit. So both those things have to be put in place. And we were lucky enough to have Chris Ronaldson as our mentor. We were lucky enough, when I say we, I'm talking about the people who are coming up in my era. We saw what Chris did, how much practice he put in, and basically we copied his methods. And so we had someone who showed us the way. And as I said, I've been out of the scene for quite a while, and I don't know who's doing this kind of thing now, but that's what you've got to do.
The whole point of the Dedanists was to create a world champion. And I think you're right, we all are greedy, defending what we have fought so hard to win. And I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. I think in very different ways over the years, we've also put a lot back in. In particular, I hope Josh doesn't mind me saying so, but you know, my work for the Dedanists is based around finding world champions. Hopefully someone to come and unseat me in the next 20 years. But I think, you know, Wayne actually did, he made probably the most valid point there where certainly in terms of professionals, we really need to look at who are getting the jobs, because there aren't many. And so one thing he didn't say is that, yes, you can find somebody to be a world champion, but don't forget you can also train him to be a tremendous club professional at the same time. And so you shouldn't be scared by choosing somebody with great talent. And I think if you just look down the row here, you can see exactly what I mean. I'm going to go with a left-hander.
I haven't seen enough of them play, so I can't answer that one.
A left-hander.
I think the next world champion is going to be Claire Vigras. But in terms of the men, I'm going to say that I think the next great world champion will probably be Camden Revere, but Steve might get there ahead of him. I have a little worry that Steve Agona might be good enough in the next year or two, but I suspect that he might also be the sort of person that once he's won it, it all goes down in a screaming heap. No, we haven't mentioned the cricket yet, David. Keep it clean.
Throw in James Stout, though, please.
Sorry?
Throw in about comment you've seen Stout play.
I have seen Stout play, but not enough, and I don't know his heart's in it yet.
Can an amateur be world champion?
Very definitely. Howard was a world champion, and the reason he was world champion, he worked harder than anybody else.
We haven't mentioned cricket yet, but I was very struck by the solidarity of the Australian response to the target game and hitting the ball hard. And it may be the wrong time to ask this question, but are there national differences in the way people play tennis?
Well, I think what you've got to look at is what sport did you play before? I mean, you know, I was far more a squash player than the other gentleman here. I don't know, I can't talk for Frank, but certainly Chris was a tennis player and Rob was a tennis player and I was a squash player. And all I did was press forward all the time, trying to volley in squash and have your racket up high and just hit it hard. And so it just naturally went from that one to the other. But quite honestly, I'm going to stand by what I said. When I first started playing, I was told by many great players, let the ball go. But I thought, well, if I hit the ball into the corners nice and softly, I'm going to get killed. And every time I did hit the ball into the corner, well, Chris or Barry Totes or whoever would win the point. And it seemed just ridiculous to keep doing that. And so I didn't. Now, yes, Chris was much, much better than I was. He could handle that, right? So to be the best, you do have to have every single shot down. But I think, like in basketball, a good player, a big player is going to beat a good small player every day. And I will say, and stick to it, that a good hard hitter, generalisation, a good hard hitter will beat a good soft hitter anytime.
I've forgotten your question, David, but I think it's a good time to... yeah, obviously, like, we're way better at everything but cricket. But I might tidy up my previous comment about targets and forcing whatever. The point about hitting a target is you need to have the right ball to approach that target. And believe it or not, that comes from very tight and precise floor play. You set the guy up, he gives you the ball you want, and then you put it in the target.
Now I agree with him.
Well, let me ask a question. We all of us meet club pros and top players as match play gladiators, as coaches, and as club managers. And I wanted to ask you, because clearly the role of the professional is crucial in leading, how you see it, what emphasis you put on it, and how it might and ought to develop, the role of the club professional. Don't all leap up to answer at once.
Well, I'm sure you're all aware here that the Hopton Review took place about a year ago, and one of the questions that was asked then was, what are the primary requisites for a club professional? And if that question had been asked, say, at Manchester in 1965, you might have had a very different answer, because certainly when I started playing this game, the main requirements for a professional were to mark the matches and sow the balls. And the sort of answers coming back from the Hopton Review were things like IT skills, communication skills, salesman, that sort of thing. I have to say that I asked that question privately of one Lachlan Ducar, and his response quite startled me. It said, naked playing ambition. And his contention was that anyone who was that ambitious, who would work that hard at becoming a good player, would also turn out to be a good hard worker anyway.
I have heard Frank say that he was going to acquire a PC and an email address. I have to say this was 3 years ago, but he said it with such conviction.
I actually bought a laptop on my last trip to England, and it is still in the case unopened. I really can't see a need. There's a telephone. Grief, why? Anyway, a club professional, most important. The most important person in the club, outside of the treasurer probably. But he has so many duties. I agree with Chris. In my early years, it was a question of sewing tennis balls, repairing the nets, making sure the courts were clean. But gladly, times have changed. His role is to teach people to play tennis and to teach them to the best of his ability, and hopefully he's going to do a good job. I think he is a very, very important person.
I don't think those comments can be improved upon very much. I will add, though, one other thing that's changed. I went down to Aiken just recently and was coaching there. And I was very much surprised and pleased to see that I didn't have to make tennis balls anymore. I mean, I played with balls that had been made by, I think, from Haiti, and to my mind, they were great. They were fine, and therefore 30% of what I considered to be my my job, I didn't have to do anymore. It was great, and it took a lot of time away doing this menial job, and I think if they're not looked at now by everybody, I think every club should look closely at using this kind of thing, because it's fantastic, and you can get down to the job of actually promoting the game or making sure your court's fully booked and things like that. So to me, that was a revelation.
I have a stake in that company as well, which Wayne didn't know about, so I couldn't agree more. I was a terrible club professional, and not ashamed to admit that. But I think that you need to at least be able to teach people how to play this game properly. Otherwise, what's the point?
What? Have to have a microphone to make a point. No, not if it's you. Frank, a particular question. And maybe I don't know that either of the other two. Did you ever play against Naughty Knox in practice or any international?
I played Naughty Knox just after he'd retired from his World Championship. I played him in New York, and he was, if somebody had said to me who is the best player you've ever played against, he would be certainly up there. He was very tough, lovely person to play against, but ruthless on the court. Yeah, I thought he was a great player. Maybe people don't realise just how good he was, but he was a tremendous player and a very forceful player on a tennis court. Anybody else know?
I played Naughty hundreds of times. Knew him really well. Stayed with him down in Aiken, South Carolina. Knew his wife very well too, and in the nicest way. She's a lovely lady.
Not sure what that's got to do with it.
But Naughty was well past his prime when I was playing him. One thing he said to me that really sticks in my mind though so much. First of all, the Boss, Wixon and Knox, no matter what we did, no matter what shot you did, Pierre had always done it better. If you did a shot in a game, they'd stop. They'd wave, stop, and then they'd look at you and they'd go, there, that's Pierre. But one time, and once only, did Naughty say to me, took me aside and said, there's one thing that Chris especially, and you to a certain extent, do much better than Pierre did. And I said, oh, really? What was that? And he said, you serve so much better. That's the only thing. To which I replied straight away, well, then I can't believe that he would win. Because if he can't serve better, how could he control what's going on? But the answer was that he'd just find a way. So that's Naughty was a great friend of mine and a great player, and very, very fast, even when he was well into his late 50s. So extremely fast.
That's not old.
Gabby.
Hey, everyone talks about getting more young players into the game, but do you believe it's happening, and what do you think is the best way to make it happen?
It's not happening enough. It comes back to courts, doesn't it? We need courts. Projects like Guildford have got to go ahead, otherwise we've got no chance. I mean, we're looking at courts in this country that are already packed, full of, should I say, very experienced players. But, I don't know what we can do without more courts. It's going to be a genuine battle, and unless clubs address this idea of freeing up time specifically for junior development, it's not going to happen. And the Dedanists are doing a fantastic job at developing great junior players, and the clubs have got to take a role in opening up their court time, perhaps to the detriment of the balance sheet, just to to make this happen. Otherwise, we're going to slowly strangle ourselves to death.
I'll certainly endorse what Rob said about Guildford and the building of courts at schools and universities, because that's how we're going to do it. Someone was just making the comment to me this evening, it's how is it possible for any young person living in London to play this game? It's very, very difficult. So we need it more in schools and more at places like Guildford. And I hope the TNRA will, and the Dedanists for that matter, will continue to throw their weight behind it.
Gentlemen, I want to change the subject slightly and just ask all four of you, including you, Frank, despite your age, if you were all fit in 6 months, 9 months, a year's time, how do you feel about playing each other off handicap? And which one of you thinks they would win?
Peter, me. I'd have the largest handicap by far. And with that kind of I would put so much money on.
Yeah, once you say handicap, well, then I can't answer it. Well, how much handicap are you going to give me? Tell me that and I'll tell you what I think I'd do.
I got him covered.
Pass.
The passes don't exist anymore. They're fools. Right.
Holycourt. Sorry, not Holycourt.
Good.
Seacourt by far has produced our most talented and successful young pros. And it's neither a school nor a university club. It's a neighbourhood, it's a community club. So do you think there's more of a benefit to putting real tennis among the community rather than a university or a school, but make it part of lawn tennis and squash and bowls or whatever, making it part of your local garden tennis club?
It's a great idea. The trouble is that communities usually can't afford it. They usually don't have the land, and where they do have the land, they usually have great difficulty with planning permission. And that's the great advantage of schools. They usually have the land, and they usually find it much easier to get planning permission. You can have a school that's in a local community. I think you can combine the two.
I think Hailing Island is in such a residential area. And really in the winter time, there's not that much for people to do down there, although I love Hailing Island. Yes. So everybody goes down to Hailing Island to see Peter Dawes, obviously.
What happened in the ditch at Hailing Island?
We're not going into that one. Oh, gee, yeah. I fell. So I think that's why Hailing is so popular. One of my favourite places to visit, and I had some great times there. But I think that is why, because the people are so local. And certainly a great idea. I agree with what you're saying. Hailing Island is an example, and maybe we should look at it closer.
The intention of the Guildford Centre is it will sit alongside 6 international grass bank squash courts, a lawn tennis hall that's between 6 and 12 indoor lawn tennis courts. You've got basketball courts, so you've got a full panoply of top-class sports facilities. And as you say, drawing young people into what that offers, and and dragging them across by the love of the game that we have is how I think you can nurture young talent and bring people alive to the joy of this game.
Yes, I don't know if you all heard what David said, but essentially the University of Surrey just built a £40 million sports centre, and it doesn't look like a university sports centre. It looks like a sort of high-class David Lloyd's, and they now have something like 12,000 members. And considering that they want to have a real tennis centre there, to do our best to build one there, I think is a no-brainer.
So what would you all have liked to have achieved in the game which so far you haven't achieved?
Well, I wish Sydney was still playing. They're still there.
To have won the World Championship.
I think from my point of view, what I'd want to be able to do is to see the game on an entirely secure footing. When I started, which was 1970, the game of real tennis was, in effect, dying. There were about 25 active courts left in the world. On average, they probably were in use perhaps 3 hours a day. Anyone looking at the game then would have thought it was just about to die. And although we've done very well in the last 40 years, you know, it could just be the last flickering of a light bulb before it goes out. So we have the momentum now. I'd just like to see the sort of developments we've been talking about. Long live the Dedanists. And by the way, in case no one else has the opportunity tonight, thank you so much to Josh and Paul for putting this deal together. Josh and Graham Tompkinson work enormously hard throughout the year on these projects, and we'd be lost without them.
Keep giving it back.
Well, look, thank you very much.